progresses through life, you're left with that question of why. Why are you at this point in time doing what you do? Where is the link? How do you trace back now from sitting in St. Peter's back to a rural country church where that gift of faith was first enacted? And the only common thread in my life thus far, is faith. Faith in a Jesus that is there, that is your constant companion in every single step that you take. Now, the diplomatic life poses some fundamental challenges to an individual who is living it. And one of the most fundamental it poses is called global mobility, where you must be deployed anywhere in the world at any point in time. And for those of you who may not know how that functions, imagine a situation where you are taken from your family and friends and placed into an environment, perhaps many thousands of miles away, in a different culture where you don't know anyone. We choose to do that. But without faith, I don't think I could make that choice. Because as you entered here this evening, I presume each of you placed your finger at some point into the holy water font and you blessed yourself. And I have done that. I have done it in my home parish church for the first 18 years of my life. I've done it in Westminster Cathedral. I've done it in New York. I've done it in Krakow. I've done it in Belgium. And I now do it in Rome. And from next April, I hope I'll be able to do it in Pakistan. But when you do it, just don't think of the immediate. Just don't think of what's sitting here in front of you. Yes, your parish community is important, but it's one of the first steps. It's not the only step. Last Thursday night in St. Peter's Basilica, I attended what was probably the most moving Mass I have attended in 5 years in this job. At that Mass were 65 people in one section of the congregation. And they wore plaster, and they were on crutches, and they had bandages on. And they ranged in all ages, from infants right up to pensioners. And those 65 people were some of the survivors who are being treated in Italian hospitals from those vicious attacks on the Catholic Cathedral in Baghdad earlier this month, in which nearly 70 people were murdered. And when it came to communion, the line formed. And some, with great physical difficulty, lined up to receive the Eucharist. And as they did so, on their lapels, some of them had the pictures of their family members who were no longer with them. And one mother went up, and she carried a 7-month-old child, a little girl. And the little girl had pinned to her a picture of her father and a picture of her 2 little brothers. And the mother and the daughter, that was all that was left of that family. And you ask yourself, where is the witness in my life when you experience that? Indeed, you could ask yourself, where is the witness in our lives when we experience that? For that little family, and I went to speak through an interpreter to them afterwards, it is unlikely that they will see their homeland again. It is unlikely that they will go back to a land where Christianity has lived for 2,000 years. But it brought home something to me brought home something that you're here tonight to do. You're here as a first step towards preparing for the Eucharistic Congress in 2012 in Dublin. And last Thursday night in Rome, at about 5:45, that was part of that preparation for that Eucharistic Congress. Because here were these people, having come from a church, having come from a cathedral, where many members of their family were slaughtered, now in Rome getting treatment in the hospitals. And they had come to that Mass, and they had lined up again to receive the Blessed Sacrament. That is witness. Let me say something else about witness. In 1995, I found myself living in Krakow. And Krakow during the winter is as cold as Oma is right now. And I decided I would trace the roots of Pope John Paul II over the course of one weekend. And I found myself standing in front of his family grave in the military graveyard in Krakow. And when you stand there and you look at the grave of the Wojtyla family, you see his mother, his father, his brother. And all around the grave is the history of 20th century Europe. On the right, you have hundreds of German war dead. On the left, you have some Soviets. You have the Polish military all around the family grave. And then you have some British war dead a little bit beyond. And it took home to me something of the witness of John Paul II and perhaps why he chose religion or why he chose priesthood. Because for John Paul II, indeed also for Pope Benedict, albeit from a different country, for them the act of faith or the act of witness to that faith was to become more involved in their faith journey. The act of witness was to say that faith is not part of the obsolete. It is not that which must be cast aside in the face of modernity. Indeed, it is needed by modernity to check it. Faith for John Paul II, the witness to faith, and the witness for Pope Benedict XVI during the Second World War was to act upon the totalitarian regimes as a check, because it was part of the pluralism of that society. Their witness in the Second World War, despite the horrors that they saw, whether it was John Paul II returning to Krakow, trying to bring his ill father back into the city so that he could avoid the advancing German forces and the bombardment that Krakow was experiencing, or Benedict XVI as a young teenager whose first cousin was taken by the Third Reich and killed because of her disability. These people, like the people in the cathedral in Baghdad, did not turn their back on the church or on faith because of trials and tribulations. Indeed, they embraced it. Now, what about us today? What is our challenge? It would be wrong for me or for anyone else to say that this hasn't been a testing time for Christianity in Ireland. And in many respects, justifiably so. But as we look forward to 2012, will we pass on that chain of memory? Will this generation be a chain? Because that chain requires a link, and that link must be renewed in each generation. If it isn't, the chain breaks. I can only respond to that personally. From the first time I moved to London at the age, I first went at the age of 16, but I moved permanently at the age of 22. And you have a choice. Nobody knows you. You don't have to go to Mass. In fact, the positive inducement from many people around you would be not to go to Mass. I don't think it was conscious whether to go or not to go. Perhaps at the start, and perhaps many times one goes out of habit. But at a certain stage you realize that without faith, without that anchor, you wouldn't be who you are. You wouldn't be authentic to yourself. You wouldn't be faithful to the trust that your parents and your godparents placed in you. Now, tonight, I'm unsure about as you start this week and as you look forward to your preparations to the Eucharistic Congress. I'm unsure for one reason, because I'm not qualified to stand here and to say anything to you. There are probably 95% of you that would be more eligible to stand here and talk about faith rather than me. But I'm going to say one thing. If the church is to be renewed, if that chain of memory in Ireland and in the history of Irish Christianity is to remain strong, then what you are doing here tonight is a first step in making sure that that link is strong for your generation. What we are asked to do, according to Pope Benedict, is to be a creative minority. It is to be a minority that doesn't run from the world, but embraces it. That when you walk through that door, yes, you are walking into a sacred space, but you are walking in as a person who has a job, who has a family, who has friends. This space is not divorced from the outside world. It is a key part of it. And perhaps in the future, those of you that come in will be more of a minority than you were in the past. Perhaps it will call on you to take more difficult steps to come out and to attend Mass, to learn about your faith. You might have to defend your point of view because perhaps the culture, the society won't reinforce it. But you, by coming through the door, you are being faithful to the call of Pope Benedict to be a creative minority. You are defining yourself once you put that finger into the holy water font. You are being a creative minority that actually is the first step in transforming the society that we are in. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to bring you back to that cathedral in Baghdad just before I conclude. Because in the past, Irish Christianity has known trials and tribulations. And this is the first week of Advent. And if I could ask one thing of you, I would ask you to think of this over the next 4 weeks, indeed over the next 2 years, as you prepare for Dublin in 2012. As you place your finger in the holy water font, and as you bless yourself in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, please think of one image. Think of the injured from that Baghdad cathedral lining up to receive communion. And whenever you feel complacent about what we do, or perhaps we run through the words or the actions of the Mass, stop and think of that witness.